everybody. Thank you so much for coming. I realize you can be home watching some fabulous TV show and eating ice cream and all kinds of other stuff, but you're here and we need you because we're writers and we need readers and listeners. So, thank you for coming. And thank you, Beth, for dreaming up this brilliant series, and Dewey Hall for housing us. So here's a round of applause for you all. This isn't really just my Thursday group. It's also my Tuesday group, which is a brand new group just started. We have one reader from my Tuesday group here. That's Lisa Cavender. Lisa, will you raise your hand? Everyone else at the table is from my Thursday group. Let's see. My Thursday group meets in the afternoon every Thursday, and we have been meeting for 7.5 years, since 2016, January of 2016. My Tuesday morning group just started this February. So, what else? Joan Embree is not a member of any of our groups except we consider her an honorary member. She has read with us on previous occasions, and she's reading again with us tonight. Joan Embree, would you raise your hand? Okay, we're going to be reading Lydia Littlefield will start us off tonight, and then Lisa Cavender, and then Julie McCarthy. Then we'll break for pizza for 10 minutes, 15. And then Molly Boxer will read, and Terry Wise, Joan Cohen, me, and then Joan Embree at the end. Thomas Mann said, and I love this quote, he said, "A writer is someone for whom writing is more difficult than it is for other people." And I know every writer reading tonight will agree with that. I know I agree with that. We work very hard to make our writing interesting, because that, in the end, is what a writer needs to do. Be interesting, keep you listening, keep you from thinking about what you're going to pick up at the store tomorrow or what's on your to-do list. But we won't press our luck. We're going to keep it brisk. Everyone's going to read for, I've asked, 7.5 minutes. And we'll go from there. It should get you out fairly early. Thank you for being here. Lydia.
This is a chapter in a longer story about a character named Philippa Mainwaring, known as Pipsy. Born in 1920, she has made and lost several fortunes and husbands. Her accomplishments and conquests are legion. In this chapter, it is 2007. Pipsy's 25-year-old great-niece, Melba, is spending the summer at Pipsy's palatial house in the Berkshires. Melba paints large-format abstract paintings in the pool house. Her great-aunt Pipsy has been in Finland since early May, visiting friends from her 10 years in the artsy bohemian underground of 1940s Helsinki. Pipsy suggested that Melba invite a few friends for her birthday. It is Sunday, July 15th, the day after Melba's 25th birthday. Pipsy is expected home in 2 days. On the last day of Melba's birthday weekend, most of the 33 guests slept very late and straggled into the breakfast room looking like dazed sheep badly in need of shearing. 2 45-cup coffee urns could not keep up with demand. Melba thought 4 dozen bagels would be enough, but the platters on the buffet had only crumbs and seeds on them. Melba found Ilsa, Pipsy's manager of the household, in the kitchen. "Ja, Melba, they ate all the bagels. Now we are making scones." 5 of the nicest guests had been up since about 7. They helped clean up the broken glass and furniture by the pool and were starting on trying to fix the ruts in the lawn. Reports of missing items were trickling in. 2 wallets, many earrings, Arabella Fisher's golden Coke spoon, a suitcase, a trombone, and Mimi's leather-bound pocket atlas. Most of it was presumed to be at the bottom of the pool, along with all of the pool furniture and every brazier on the premises. The true frenzy of festivity had begun at about 1 a.m. when a small group of revelers agreed they'd always wanted to know what riding on a flying carpet feels like. A plan was hatched. "A floating carpet will feel just like a flying carpet and yet be much safer," reasoned the ever-vigilant yet very, very drunk Howard. He, James, and Melba chose the front hall rug, a worn but very fine claret-red saruk, while Mimi and Dardis herded Pipsy's many floats to the shallow end. The flying carpet team wrestled the rug out to the pool. Rishi, Melba's lighting designer friend, had decreed that they would do everything by candlelight that night, a prescient move perfectly eliciting Arabian starlight. The perceptive DJ created a rap mashup of the theme songs to Aladdin and Titanic. Guests guzzled their drinks, tossed their glasses into the hydrangeas, leapt into the pool, and took hold of the outer edges of the still-floating rug. Mimi and Dardis had done an excellent job of amassing the floats, and the 5 people aboard the rug floated for a good 2 minutes in the turbulent waters before the whole arrangement folded in upon itself and all was lost. There was brief concern that people were lost as well, but everyone came up shrieking with laughter. In the light of day, looking into the pool, one could see that there were a great many things in there, many of them obscured by the Persian carpet and the surprising new color of the water. Lavender! Stunning, really, dotted as it was with dozens of floating lemons. Kenji, the art photographer of the bunch, had been up since dawn photographing the spectacular mess. At first, Melba feared that the color in the water had leached out of the wine-red rug, but it wasn't that. Kenji explained. Peter and Gloria's 7-year-old daughter, Frida, a.k.a. Goya Girl, had been transfixed by the collection of quart-sized bottles of Melba's paints. She had chosen her favorites: quinacridone violet, Prussian blue, alizarin crimson, and she had poured them into the dark end of the pool at about 9 while people had been eating dinner in the conservatory. No one had noticed. It wasn't as interesting as she had hoped. She wasn't allowed to get in the water, so she couldn't mix it all up. The paint just sat in a blob at the bottom of the pool. Frida had gone upstairs to read her Moomintroll book. The colors didn't start to mix in until later in the night when the waters were frenzied. Melba thought of her many birthdays with Great Aunt Pipsy and how, every year, instead of yelling "Happy Birthday" when Melba blew out her candles, Pipsy would yell "Vive la Révolution!" followed by a rendition of La Marseillaise. Pipsy loved that Melba had been born on Bastille Day, and she encouraged rebellion at every turn. She reveled in the comeuppances of bad guys, bloviators, and other vile people. She might not actually own a guillotine or any other real tools of torture, but Pipsy was a master at exacting payment from fools. Pipsy would return on Tuesday, and the pool needed what? Draining? Filters replaced? Tiles scrubbed? Interior repainted? How could she fix this in time? There was no knowing what Pipsy might do when she saw this mess. Melba was vibrating with sleep deprivation and fury at having been dumb enough to get so drunk. She looked down the hill to the thatch-roofed folly called the herbarium. Rocco the gardener would be there, as he always was on Sundays, relaxing after his weekly half-marathon run and planning the week ahead. It wasn't really just an herbarium, and Rocco wasn't really just a gardener. Rocco and Pipsy have a marvelous collection of understandings about things, ranging from biodynamic farming to German expressionist art, to best ways to prepare and roast a goose, to dowsing for water, and best methods of bringing a woman or a man or anyone really to climax on a crowded train. They have enjoyed each other's fascinating minds immensely and have enjoyed their separate lives in this corner of the Berkshires. He lives in the cottage in the apple orchard on the other side of the herbarium, and Pipsy lives in the house when she is not traveling. Rocco heard Melba's steps on the gravel path and looked up from his crossword puzzle when she leaned in through the Dutch door. He knew he would be dragged into this mess, but had wanted Melba to take some initiative. "Rocco." "Hello, Melba." Silence. Melba saw the crossword puzzle on the potting table, and Rocco saw the worry lines in Melba's face disappear. "Is it a good one today?" she asked. She and Rocco had played word games since she was a small child. 8-letter word for future of over-imbibing? Melba made her scowling thinker face and then said, "Hangover? Is that really in the crossword today?" "Yes, it is." "No way." She walked over and snatched the paper to take a look. Rocco said, "Might this be a distraction from what you really came down here to ask?" Melba's face fell and she dropped the crossword onto the table. "Yes, I came down to ask how to drain the pool." "What? Melba? Really? Ilsa told me it was bad, but what is in there that can't be fished out?" Melba made an awful face that Rocco understood. He grabbed his hat and they headed up. When Rocco saw the purple water and the mounds of stuff hidden under the submerged rug, he agreed that this was an emergency that warranted draining the pool. It would take days to arrange this, and Pipsy was due back in less than 48 hours. "Okay, Melba, you decide. Do you invent a story to tell Pipsy? Do you tell her the truth and convince her to extend her travel plans? Or do you just let her come home to—" He gestured to the mess. His slow-moving eyes and jutting-out, cogitating lips told Melba he was not going to turn away from her in disgust. He was just considering the possibilities, waiting for Melba to determine just how awful the days ahead would be. Rocco could see that Melba was not feeling well. She sank onto the stone terrace, near defeat. Rocco reminded her of her own strategy that she had shared with him long ago. He gently said, "What would Pipsy do?" Thanks, everybody. Thanks. Next up is Lisa Cavender.
Well, that's a lot to live up to. Thank you, Lydia. That was really beautiful, and it was so funny. My pieces are very short. I have about 7 of them, and they're not so funny. But here goes nothing. Hibernal. Cold is the day gone by, where the frosty blue sky begins to fade. Barren trees of statuesque beauty watch over fields of fallow hay. Abandoned tractors put out to pasture sit quietly still, awaiting the curtain of darkness. The cemetery sleeps in the distance. Buried deep beneath the snow, with breath I could not take, I scraped and scratched and clawed with frigid hands I could not shake. And as my life slowly slipped away, spring came to save the day. And melting the heaviness from my heart, I clambered to the surface once again to feel the warmth upon my skin, to breathe the life that once had been. Subway man. I see you, angry man, smug-faced man, sitting there, your legs spread wide, wide as the Sargasso Sea. You suck the air with all your might. You suck until the car walls cave in and all the people tumble your way, down your throat and into your stench-ridden bowels to burn in your hell. And then you spit them out one by one to lie there dead in your wake, all afoul. I died that day. You slithered through my body, your toxic junk ripping out my soul, burning my flesh and bones. I died that day and many more as pieces of me shattered to the floor. Angry man. Oh, you little to nothing man, you pillage, you rape, you torture, you hate. Your anger spreads like glue, sticking to where it does not belong, eating at our hearts and souls. I gladly swat you like a fly. Into oblivion you die. Elia. I lushed you in my schoolgirl dreams, you from another world with exotic blood running through your veins, strutting your intellectual rough stuff. You thought you were so cool, and you were so cool. I froze like Galatea, waiting for you to thaw me out through and through. And then finally, this is a very short piece from a novel I am slowly working on. And the working title is called The Dreams of Long Ago. And my protagonist is Niles, and this is from his voice. After I left my uncle for the evening, I walked past my sister's room on the way up to the turret, pausing to look at the photograph on her nightstand. The one of the three of us as children standing in front of the old willow tree in the garden. It made me think of all the months gone by that I hadn't seen her, wondering how she was taking the news of our parents' death. And when I finally made it up to the turret, the clear sky from the day had gone, and the fog from the Golden Gate had drifted in and was rising up to the windows, encircling me from outside. I sank down into my uncle's voluminous leather armchair, the only piece of furniture that fit in the room, and gazed out the tall Victorian windows, letting my mind drift back through the years when we were all still a family, when Saoirse, Lorcan, and I spent hours sailing together on the Columbia River and pretending we were on great adventures to lands unknown. And all the while, I watched the fog slowly wind its way up the turret like a snake around its prey until I could no longer keep my eyes open. And in the morning, when I awoke still in the armchair from the night before, the fog had disappeared, and once again the sky was blue, and I felt refreshed as if the fog had temporarily cleansed my mind of all my worries. Thank you. And now the talented Julie McCarthy.
So I'm going to read two very short pieces. The first is called Posture Pictures. Can you hear me? Now? Good? Okay. My mother was a nurse at the all-girls school I attended. She wore a trim white uniform, a starched white cap, and a gold pin with a garnet that she'd received when she graduated from Columbia Presbyterian Nursing School. Her office was small, containing 2 single beds precisely made, a scale, and a large oak desk. Her office overlooked the gymnasium, and as a school nurse, she came under the auspices of the gym department. The gym department was composed of an odd-looking trio: Miss Carling, clipped white hair, long gray skirt and blazer; Miss King, buck-toothed, wearing thick glasses and short frizzed hair; and Miss Day, short and stocky. She was the beauty of the bunch, with her rosy cheeks and small features. We wore uniforms, blue tunics that fell several inches above our knees, white V-neck shirts, and, I can't decide whether I can read better with or without, and red or white belts, depending on what team we were on. When we reached 5th grade, it suddenly became imperative that our knees be covered. We were issued blue skirts that were worn over tunics buttoned down the front and fell to mid-calf. It was my first lesson in female decorum. There were parts of my body not fit to be shown. Little did I know that knees might be regarded as objects of desire. In gym class, however, we were allowed to unbutton our skirts and let our knees shine forth. Every year, the gym department took posture pictures. The photo sessions were held in a tiny room off the gymnasium where a camera on a tripod was set up. Either Miss King or Miss Day was in charge of pushing the shutter. One by one we entered, took off every stitch of clothing, and stood in front of the camera naked. Click went the camera as we turned from side to side and front to back. It lasted an eternity. For a self-conscious, pubescent girl, there was no worse torture. None of us ever talked about these photo sessions. I can't imagine that I was the only one that felt uncomfortable. But somehow, whatever each one of us experienced in that little room was taboo. I never mentioned it to my mother, and as the years passed, I forgot about it. One day, many years later, I met a woman who had gone to the same school. She was much younger than I, but remembered my mother. Nursey, she called her. For some reason, the posture pictures came flooding back, and I asked her if she had to endure them as well. "Oh, yes," she said. "I hated them." "Why didn't we say something? Why didn't our parents say something?" I asked. "Shame," she said. I went home and thought about it. Why did we feel shame and not anger or outrage that we were being subjected to something so demeaning? Like nubile sheep, we lined up and posed and slunk away, only to go through it again the next year. My mother, as part of the gym department, knew about the pictures. She had to have. How could she have thought that this was all right? She was close friends with the gym teachers. Was that why she never said anything? She didn't want to rock the boat? Or did she think it was a perfectly natural way to assess our posture? Did it never occur to her that standing in her underwear might have revealed just as much? My mother is long gone, so I can no longer ask these questions. Just as well, because her answer probably would have infuriated me. "Why are you kicking up such a fuss, Jewel? It was no big deal," I can hear her say. To this day, I am angry with her for not protecting me and all the other girls in the school. Perhaps protecting is too strong a word, since nothing ever happened, as far as I know. But I sensed then, and I feel now, that a line was crossed. A trust was violated, and my mother was complicit. My husband is of the inquiring minds, want to know variety. He Googled the school and somehow found a newspaper article from not so long ago. The article talked about a suit that had been brought against the school by a former student or parent, I can't remember which. The suit demanded that all the posture photographs that had been kept all those years in a drawer somewhere were to be destroyed. I couldn't believe it. They had kept them all the years that I was growing up, growing into my body and feeling shame. Not shame for anything I did or didn't do, or for anything that was done to me, but an existential shame that hovers around me still. The second piece is called the Fluhardys. I lived next door to the Fluhardys, who lived in a large yellow house with a deep front porch. Their house perched on a hill overlooking mine. They had 3 sons. Jimmy was the youngest, my age, 12. He was scrawny, had red hair, a crew cut, and freckles all over his face, even his ears. He looked as if someone had dumped too many sprinkles on a vanilla ice cream cone. For some reason, Jimmy liked to torment me, finding elaborate ways to shock me or gross me out. even going so far as to squish toads on our metal doormat. I hated him with every fiber of my being. His brothers, twins, were to me mature men, but in reality were probably 16. Unlike Jimmy, they were divine, like identical gods. In my 12-year-old mind, I lusted after them, which meant that I turned beet red and mute every time I saw them. One sleepy summer afternoon, the sound of sirens pierced the quiet. I ran outside to see the foolhardy house engulfed in flames. Hours later, the fire was brought under control, but the house was lost. Fortunately, no one had been at home at the time. My father offered to put the family up for as long as they needed a place to stay. Jimmy and his parents found lodging elsewhere, but the twins opted to stay with us. Imagine my heart, my mind, my body when I found out. I could hardly contain myself on one hand, and on the other I wondered how I would ever manage to speak to them or contain my violent blushing. The brothers had lives of their own, summer jobs, friends. Basically, they just used our house to sleep. Every morning I would wait for them to leave. Then I would sneak into their room. The covers on each twin bed were tossed aside, and the floor was littered with articles of clothing. On the bureau sat a bottle of Aramis aftershave. I can smell it to this day. On days that I was feeling particularly bold, I would lie on one bed and then the other. I would sink my face in each pillow and inhale deeply, breathing in the smell of sweat and aftershave down into my lungs. I wanted to roll in their scents like a dog, wear them all day like a mantle. It was then, that summer, that I knew this is what it feels like to be a woman.
Hi, I'm Molly Boxer, and for the past 20 years I've been writing memoir. Often my writings are humorous. Today, not so much. Sorry. I am struggling today, feeling flat, uninspired to do anything, even the things I like to do, or usually want to do, like taking the dogs for a walk. They're lying behind me right now, having just made the trek with me across the hall from my sewing room to my study. Since the boys, now in their 30s, have left, I've been claiming all the rooms of the house for myself, one by one. Lou thinks it's funny, or perhaps ridiculous. I think it's well-deserved. I had been working on a pair of pants for a friend, which is much harder than making a pair for myself. I don't know her size, which doesn't help. I just know she's taller and thinner than I am. I redid the waistband 3 times yesterday and still wasn't happy with it. Luckily, today I was put on hold for an hour, on hold with the DMV. So sitting still and ripping out the entire waistband yet again was tolerable. Luck struck again when Lou called and I lost my place online. So I had another hour to sew in a new waistband, hem the pants, wrap them up, and prepare to send them to California. All that luck was due to that time that Charlie, our 35-year-old son, totaled my car without being in possession of a license. The DMV is only now, 3 years later, catching up to him. He thought he had been lucky enough to fall through the bureaucratic crack. He told me I was lucky because I got a new car thanks to him. A new car that I had neither wanted nor needed, and contrary to what he believes, came with its own cost. He is in India now, at an ashram, so I called the DMV for him. Wait, you ask. Why wasn't he able to respond? Good question. I'm still feeling anxious. Maybe I'll have an edible, but I don't want to do that anymore. Also, I want to write, though I'm off to a slow start. It often takes me a while to get to where I need to go. Why do I write anyway? sometimes to process things, which usually helps, but the larger reason is that I have a story to tell. That of being a mother raising 4 boys, one of whom has schizophrenia, although he doesn't accept that diagnosis now. Ben was 18 when he first stepped off a plane from Amsterdam, and his life changed forever. Once home, he took to his bedroom, and I went to be with him. He told me about his last few days in Amsterdam, about how the streetlights were sending him to a library where he could read any book he picked up, despite the fact it was written in Dutch. Like the fact that the entire city was trying to kill him with little red lasers. The fact that he was really the second coming of Christ and he alone could save the world. That the man at the table next to him, though appearing to speak to the person at his own table, was actually communicating to Ben. Trans-conversation is what Ben called it. I desperately wanted to believe what he was telling me, but I couldn't. After a few days of this, I finally took him to the Berkshire Medical Center. We were ushered into a dingy room with a chipped linoleum floor, 2 mismatched and stained chairs, a stretcher, and a little blinking camera in the corner of the ceiling. Nurses, crisis team members, intake counselors, medical doctors, interns, psychiatrists all came in to ask Ben questions. There were long pauses when we were alone in the room. Then someone else would come in with more questions, often the same questions. Then there was a shift change and new people came in. I could see them in the nurses' station, filling out forms, and I could sometimes hear mumbled phone conversations with Blue Cross Blue Shield as the staff tried to convince them that Ben met the criteria to be admitted. Somehow, I held it together for 6 hours, doing my best to stay calm so that he would stay calm. And then, suddenly, it was time to take an elevator ride up to the ward. Ben had been admitted. I watched him being led down a hallway as the elevator doors closed, leaving me to descend back to the ER alone, to walk out in the cold night air to the parking garage. It was 2 a.m. by then. I got into my car, started the engine, and then it hit me. I had admitted my son to a psych ward. Sobs overtook my body as that thought repeated itself relentlessly in my brain. I had admitted my son to a psych ward. 15 minutes later, still sobbing, I walked up the stairs to my bedroom, where my husband lay waiting for me. He took me in his arms until it was finally morning. I got up, fed Ben's 3 younger brothers breakfast, hugged them, and sent them off to school. Lou and I went to see Ben that night at visiting hours and every night for the next 2 weeks. I have brought Ben to the ER at least a dozen times since then. It's always the same, though I no longer cry. The process always takes 6 hours. Sometimes Ben has asked to go to the hospital, and I would sit with him in yet another dingy room, hoping his resolve would stay strong. Other times, Ben has been sent to the hospital by the police, like when he ditched his car on the highway in New York State and was walking barefoot down the breakdown lane, or the time he was pulled over by the police for speeding and he took off as soon as they stopped. When they pulled him over the second time, he told them his name was Spencer Christie. Both times I was called and told to take him to the ER. Both times I was deathly afraid he would jump out of the car before we got to the hospital. Both times he was admitted. He was always admitted. Ben had been in other hospitals too. Once he stole my car and drove to Logan Airport. He parked right up front, right where we'd all like to park. He tried to get through security and onto a plane, saying he had a ticket in his pocket. He didn't want to show it to them and was incensed that they wouldn't believe him and let him onto a plane. Back outside, a chain was being attached to my car. Ben jumped onto the roof to prevent it from being towed. A policeman sent him to the nearest hospital for a psych evaluation. Ben called me later that night, laughing as he told me he got into McLean Hospital a lot quicker than I could have gotten him in. And he was right. 2 weeks after that first hospitalization, 2 weeks generally being the longest stay insurance will pay for, we were told he was being released. I was shocked. Ben was still extremely paranoid. I had no idea how to take care of him at home. I found another hospital to take him, Silver Hill in New Canaan, Connecticut. Ben insisted the car windows be shut as we drove him there to keep people from overhearing our conversations in the car. That stay lasted several months on our dime until, like what was to become a pattern, his stay ended abruptly. Still flagrantly paranoid, he refused to stay any longer. We couldn't make him stay. He came home. The cycle continues today.
Hi, I'm Terry Wise, and I've been writing about my brother John, who died of a heart attack in November 2020, and also about my experience of cleaning out his house in the months that followed. And this particular piece is one of the more joyous aspects of cleaning out his house. A lot of it was not very joyous. So here's John. And I have a picture that I describe in it, so afterwards, if you want to see it, I'll show it to you up close. May 1959, Vestal, New York. Mom! I'm home. I'm going down to the station. John had just walked up the street from the bus stop with brother Jim and some neighborhood friends. He dropped his books on the Formica and chrome kitchen table and with a quick stop at the cookie jar, headed to the garage for his bicycle. He wheeled it out through a side pass door, hopped on, and headed back down Torrance Avenue. Paused to check for traffic, then right turn onto Vestal Avenue. Within minutes, he was at the train station, where he leaned his bike against the wall of the station and walked to the tracks, looking to the left in anticipation of the 3:40 eastbound freight train coming from Cleveland via Owego with a pause in Vestal so the engineer could wave to John, then move on toward Binghamton. March 2021, Canaan, Connecticut. Dear John, your friends or Jay or the kids sometimes tell me, John would be pleased with whatever I've managed to do with your humble estate, though I'm sure you would be appalled at the vast amount of your belongings I've thrown in the trash and how many of your personal letters and notes I've read. Today, you would have truly been pleased. For 4 months now, I've been working my way through the 4 rooms of your house, the garage, and your camper, separating trash from treasure. In every room, even the attic, I found antique railroad items, lanterns, Pullman sleeping car blankets, dishes from the Rio Grande Zephyr, tickets, a ticket puncher, a conductor's hat, dining car pictures, timetables, posters, and so much more. An entire library of books on railroading, framed photos and maps. The old roll-top desk that was in your high school bedroom. Most important as a collection, though, your HO scale model trains. I'm guessing over 100 individual cars in their original boxes, plus old flimsy suitcases full of model railroading landscape pieces, trees, fences, bridges, green sand for grass, tiny gravel, houses. I even found a scale model of the Vestal, New York train station that you loved so much. As I've sorted and tossed, I've clustered all the railroad items into 2 rooms, arranging the books and best items on the bookshelves. I've known of your railroad passion all my life. By the time I was old enough to be aware, you were already hanging out at the Vestal Railroad Station, watching the moving freight cars and talking to the engineers. They got to know you, so young to be there without your mother, and they gave you rides in the engine. I treasure the photo I found in your bedroom, the 3-inch square black and white with scallopy edges showing you, probably 9 or 10 years old, wearing an engineer's cap and waving to the unknown photographer from the window of a massive freight engine, number 901. On the back, in your elementary school script, it says, "Me in local freight engine in Vestal, Lackawanna." I have a strong memory of the train room that you and Dad set up in the tiny room upstairs in that first house. It was a small room under the eaves, right next to the bedroom you shared with Jim. The entire room was filled with a plywood platform with openings in various places where you or Dad could crawl under and pop up to be in a different section of the sprawling town and country, filled with tracks, houses, trees, bridges, telephone poles, and signals. A dial on the black transformer box controlled the power to send the engine, followed by a long train of cars all around the make-believe world. When we moved away from that house, the model trains went into storage, never to be set up again. I found your membership card of the local Railroad Historical Society, where you served as secretary for several years before leaving for college. Over the years, you've mentioned wanting to buy and live in an executive car, one of those palaces on wheels, complete with everything a house would have, or maybe a Pullman car, or even a caboose. I always thought it was a great idea, perfect for you. In your rented house, I found a proposal you had made to buy a railroad car that you had traveled to Canada to see. I am extremely grateful that your proposal was not accepted, for what would I do with a railroad car? I only wish it had happened when you were 30 and full of energy and remaining years. You have claimed that railroading is your religion. It's a religion you learned honestly from our father, who loved trains and rode them for practical reasons, and from his father, who worked for the Pennsylvania Railroad. But the zeal has been there since you were a small boy. When you came to take care of Mom in this railroading town of Canaan, did you imagine you would be hearing the plaintive harmonic whistle with the short blast in the middle as the freight trains rumbled through daily, just a few blocks away? And that the town is full of people equally crazy about trains who have restored the architectural gem of a train station. Were you hovering over us today as the 5 railroad buffs from the Canaan Railroad Historical Society Museum came into the house and gazed at all you had collected, saved, and protected during your whole life? They were astounded at the volume, quality, and diversity of all that was here. Happy day. They want it all. Happy, happy day. I feel a huge weight lifted knowing your passion will have a home and you will have a legacy. It took 3 hours, 6 cars, 3 trucks, and 8 volunteers to move everything to the Railroad Museum. It was only like 3 blocks away. Then we gathered in celebration around a table in the brewery next to the museum to lift a toast to you and your treasured stuff. Next up, we have Joan Cohen.
Okay, this is from the novel I just started working on. The working title is Aging is Murder. Okay. Abby watched Lola sashay into the bistro and wondered if she practiced that Project Runway walk in her bedroom. Although Lola had been a model and an actress, Lola Lang wasn't her real name. She admitted to Abby that, to her way of thinking, Lola was a sexy name, summoning images of lolling on the Riviera and languidly sipping a gin and tonic. Lola still had long, dark hair, even though the staff at their assisted living residence wanted it cut to a practical length. They also wanted her to dispense with hair dye and root touch-ups, so she cared for her hair herself to silence their complaints. Lola prided herself on having a better body than her friends at Hayday Lodge Continuing Care Community. Not that they'd all gone to seed, but her butt was still rounder than the other residents' flat back ends. Rounder than Abby's, anyway. Sure, Lola's waist was thicker now, but she seemed to think wide belts that cinched her in hid that fact. She had one in every color, including leopard skin. Abby saw no reason to disabuse her of that notion. Lola was also the only one still using all her cosmetics. Abby, who saw Lola's foundation collecting in her facial wrinkles, didn't have the heart to give her the message that less is more for aging women. Billy, a hunky care manager in his 20s, never failed to tell Lola that she was hot. Abby knew Billy was teasing, but why let Lola in on it, since she enjoyed her reputation for sexiness and didn't want to be reminded that the bar was low in assisted living. Abby herself was resigned to the fact that assisted living was halfway down the escalator between independent living and memory care. Like it or not, when we reached the bottom, we all had to get off. Lola, whose real name was Gladys Schwartz, claimed it was a mistake that she was here. When she'd first come to Hayday Lodge to take up residence in a spacious independent living unit, she told Abby it was just a logical move. Her apartment in Boston was being turned into a condo, and she didn't want to tie up her funds in a questionable investment, what with the housing market doing a loop-de-loop. Abby had nodded sympathetically, but this was further evidence that we no longer needed our mothers to tell us fairy tales. We could tell them to ourselves. Abby had to admit Hayday Lodge did look like a backdrop for a Western modeling shoot. It was tough, though, to imagine Lola in a form-fitting, fringed cowgirl costume, brandishing a shotgun atop a palomino. There were neither shotguns nor horses at Hayday, in spite of its rusticity. But it was in the West, the far western side of Massachusetts. Today was a big day for Abby. She had an agenda and was so fired up she began talking to Yank and Sam before Lola was well settled in her vinyl captain's chair. We are going to become politically active. That's active with a capital A. We're going to make headlines. Abby felt a flush rising to her cheeks and threw back her shoulders. Although Lola had warned Abby she didn't have a sufficiently supportive bra to keep her pendulous breasts from bouncing. Sagging or bouncing breasts were on Lola's list of 7 deadly sins. Yank sighed. Abby, we're already politically active. Some of our current affairs discussions have practically become violent. And whenever someone at Hayday dies a dramatic death, we make the Berkshire Eagles headlines. Yank's ample body didn't stop at his size 19 neck, but continued straight up into fleshy cheeks. Were it not for his white beard, his face and neck would have been a single entity. Its shape, sculpted around his invisible jawline, saved him from doubling for a sumo wrestler. Abby snorted. You think you're scary in our current affairs group when you threaten someone with your walker? At least take the tennis balls off the legs. I have a better idea, and each of you has to play a part. I can't tell you unless you swear not to divulge my secret. Yank sat up straight in his chair. Lola raised an arched, penciled eyebrow, as well as the real brow below it. Even their fourth friend, Sam, who had a look of terminal boredom on his face, stopped inspecting his calluses and turned his gaze to Abby. What's your plan? He asked. Abby lowered her voice to a stage whisper. Assassination. I can't tell you more until you swear. Yank looked skeptical, but he asked anyway, is this going to get us killed? You're 90 years old. It's just occurred to you that you're going to die? Yank considered the question. He thought he would be dead a long time ago, what with his diabetes and high blood pressure. The doctor had been warning him for years that if he didn't lose weight, he'd have a stroke. Each morning, Yank woke up and congratulated himself for still being alive. His doctor, on the other hand, had died 3 years ago. The hair stood up on Lola's arms, and she realized it had been a long time since she'd had even a little thrill. She laid her hand on the table as though it were the Bible and said, "I swear." Sam would never admit it, but everyone knew he had a thing for Lola. She'd been widowed decades ago, so she was available. But Sam seemed to regard her as some kind of deity. He couldn't imagine she'd be attracted to him. He'd always had trouble keeping on weight, and over the last few years had become spindly. The staff told him he had an impish smile that put people in mind of a leprechaun. Ever seen a sexy leprechaun? He'd told Yank, who had told Abby, that he'd had thick auburn hair as a young man. His hair now was sparse and gray, and worse yet, revealed a pink scalp with liver spots. He wore a blue Boston Red Sox baseball hat everywhere except to bed, although it could no longer be tightened enough to stay on his head. He refused to buy a children's size, which would have solved the problem. A man has his pride. I forgot to introduce our illustrious writing coach and excellent writer, Maria Black.
When I walked into my grandmother's room at Cooley Dickinson Hospital, she was sleeping. I hadn't seen her for years, and at first I wasn't sure it was even her. She'd lost weight. She looked old. I could make out the bones beneath her skin, the jawbone and forehead and chin bone, and below her neck, the clavicle jutting up. What I mean is the skeleton of her I could see. There was no color in her cheeks or expression on her face, no nice clothes or hairdo or talk. It was just her, wearing one of those nightgowns a million sick people had worn before her. "Your body will become a stranger to you," she'd said to me once, my grandmother, feeling the loose skin under her upper arm. She had an IV hooked up to that arm now, and a strained look on her face like she was trying to make out something she couldn't quite hear. At last I got up and walked around, studying the heart monitor with its disappearing and reappearing line, the IV setup, the plastic baseboards and plastic wallpaper and billowy plastic liner in the trash can. I stood at the plate glass window and stared down at people getting into and out of their cars, wondering if I would recognize Betty, my grandmother's partner, when she got out of hers. I hadn't seen her in years either. She was supposed to meet me at 2, but she was late. When I was small, my grandmother, Easy, was married to Daddy Bill, and Betty was just her friend. Best friend, always around, a part of things, natural as weather. My older sister and I could walk to Betty's house from Easy and Daddy Bill's, and as kids we spent hours in Betty's attic playing dress-up with 2 trunks full of smelly old bed jackets and petticoats and costume jewelry she'd nabbed from twin great aunts, both tiny. For a while my sister had this fixation on the Queen of England. Couldn't believe there was a real queen out there in the world without a king to worry about. We had to play a game called Buckingham Palace. My sister was Queen Elizabeth, of course. Surprise, surprise. And I was little Princess Anne. Betty was our lady in waiting. She had to wait on us hand and foot, which included applying our makeup in the morning, our toilette, she called it. She'd doll us up and laugh as we clip-clopped around, issuing orders and staring at ourselves in the mirror inside her closet. We were the fanciest-ass ladies on Pagewood Avenue, Betty said. And she'd sometimes drive us back over to Easy and Daddy Bill's to show us off. We'd run around screaming, "We're fancy asses, we're fancy asses," until Easy would settle us down with tea in a real teapot and English muffins with jam. But all that was a long time ago. I was 10 when Easy and Betty gave up on Alabama and moved to Northampton, Massachusetts. Dykesville, my mother calls it. And for a while, I thought my grandmother and Betty really had gone to a place called Dykesville. But no, my sister said dykes were ladies who screwed each other, and Northampton was ground zero for it, though at 10 I wasn't sure what screwed meant either. I assumed by my sister's expression that it was very bad. Since then, a divide has run down the middle of my family. My gay grandmother and her partner on one side, my mother and sister on the other, and me straddling the middle, not sure which side to be on. Now I was 15 and pregnant in Alabama, a state that required parental consent, and I wasn't going to get it from my mother. So I got myself north in the only way I could. I hitched a ride with a woman I met at a motel pool. And now that I was north, I wanted to stay. The woman I'd hitched with, Wendy Hammond, her name was, told me she'd help me with the abortion, but wouldn't be able to put me up for long. She had too much else going on. So I called my grandmother from the road to ask if I could visit them in Northampton, hoping that somehow a visit could stretch to cover 3 years of high school. It was hard to make that call. It had been a long time since I'd talked to my grandmother, and I felt nervous, guilty really, given how badly Mom had talked about them for years and how out of touch I'd been. But Easy seemed happy to hear from me. Really, she seemed thrilled. The woman I'd hitched with lived in Saratoga Springs, New York. When we got there, she drove me to the clinic to get the pills, and she took care of me at her house, all through the bleeding and cramping. In the middle of the worst part, only 2 days after I'd called my grandmother, Betty called to say that Easy had fallen on the cement steps of their front porch getting the paper, fracturing her hip. She was going into surgery. When Betty called to tell me this, I was sitting on the toilet in Wendy Hammond's upstairs bathroom next to a wastebasket full of bloody Kotex, having the worst cramps of my life. There was blood on the floor and on the toilet seat, and I just stepped out of the shower where the water flowed red-pink with blood, and dark clots like leeches fell from my insides. The bathroom smelled of raw steak. "Can I still come?" I asked Betty, terrified that she'd say no. I didn't have anywhere else to go. And even if I'd wanted to go back to Alabama, there wasn't enough of my babysitting money left to get there. The pills had cost over $600. But Betty bellowed through the phone in that voice of hers that of course I could come. Was I kidding? They needed me now more than ever. It was about the sweetest thing I'd ever heard from anyone, ever. They were my grandparents, Easy and Betty. That's how I thought of them. I loved them. I did. But from the time I was 10, I'd listened to my family call them terrible things, and I'd as good as allowed it. Thank you. Thank you. And now Joan Embree.
Ain't no place for sissies. That's what Betty Davis said of old age. Ain't no place for sissies. I'm inclined to agree. But not for so long. It was only a couple of years ago, and I was 78, and I said to myself, man, I'm never getting old. And it's as if the universe read my mind and decided to punish me for my arrogance and pushed me off a cliff so I fell headlong down into the abyss of old age, which is what it feels like when you, all at once, it seems, lose your sight. Of course, it wasn't all at once, but it was pretty fast that I had glaucoma and dry eye syndrome, which sounds innocuous, just take some eye drops, but it's not. It kind of takes you down. I can't, so I'm old because I can't drive, I can't read, I can't write. And mostly I can't run my dogs through the woods as I've done every single morning for like 4 decades. And different dogs, of course. And you know, the woods are, I guess that was where that brought light into my life, and, you know, being in nature with the dogs and all of that. So, but anyway, I had to have cataract surgery. That was the beginning of dry eye syndrome. And then some eye doctor told me I needed glaucoma surgery, which didn't sound too appealing. And she sent me to this surgeon down in Springfield. And I saw her, and she seemed a bit full of herself, but I thought, what the hell do I care? And so my heroic daughter, Isabel, drove me to Springfield for the surgery. And you know, sometimes the Mass Pike is no piece of cake, and trucks bearing down and all of that. So we finally get to what turned out to be a vast complex of dark, lugubrious buildings with blank windows like blind eyes, and it took us forever to find the surgeon's office. And I went in, and there was a nice man at the desk, and I said, I'm here for surgery, but first I have to use the bathroom. And he said, oh, well, we don't have one. And I said, what? He said, yeah, well, we do, but it's broken. And I said, well, surely in this huge complex of buildings, there must be another bathroom. And he said, well, you'd think so, but I don't know. So I said, well, what should I do? Pee in the parking lot? And he said, in a very amicable way, he said, well, see what you can come up with. So I thought, so, which is a great title. So I said, Isabel, I have to pee out here someplace. So we saw a little cluster of dumpsters at the far end of the parking lot, and we went over, and you know, they gave us privacy, the dumpsters, and we squatted and laughed and said, see what we came up with. And now, speaking of dumpsters, so this isn't funny, but when I had a restaurant, one of my waiters said, did you hear what happened at Monday's bar last night? And no, we hadn't. And some drug dealer had stabbed his girlfriend's dog. He said, instead of you, bitch, I'm going to kill your dog. And he did, and he threw it in the dumpster. And I thought, dear God, it had a terrible ring of possibility, because Mondays was a terrific, fun place to go. But over the years, it had changed, I think, because hard drugs came in or something. But so on the way home from work, it was late. I went past Mondays, and it was dark. I couldn't find a dumpster, and I thought, oh, that couldn't have happened. But then I woke up at like 4 in the morning, and I thought, oh, I know it happened. And so I went over, and the street light was on, and I pulled my car up to the dumpster and looked in, climbed on the car and looked in, and there was this beautiful, beautiful dog with his whole side slashed. And I went home, and I called the cops, and I called different people, and nobody wanted to do anything. And my son was home, Blair, visiting from college. And Blair has lived all over the world in the most far-flung places. And every time I need him, he's there. So I thought, I can't leave this dog in the dumpster among booze bottles and cigarette butts. And I just can't leave him here. So I woke Blair up and I said, Blair, you got to help me do something. He said, what? And I told him. He said, oh, man, Mommy, are you serious? And so we climbed in that. We got the dog out, and we buried the poor dear dog in the garden. Days, maybe weeks went by, and the police decided it was time to close, to move in on the bar and close it down. And they used the dog murder as an excuse. And so they wanted to dig the dog up for forensic evidence. And I said, no, nobody would help me with, and so now you leave this dog lie in peace. And I thought, no, they'll think I'm a crazy. I got to let them do it again. But then soon thereafter, I was subpoenaed. I had to go to court. And I said, I wasn't there. All I did was bury this poor dog. And so anyway, I had to go to court. And I rode up with a cop who was called RoboCop because everybody was scared of him. He was really tough and mean. Well, he was like a living doll. I got to know him. We had fun sitting in court together and going to Friendly's for lunch and all this. But and then I end up sitting in a line with all these notorious known drug felons and me. Is it the prosecuting attorney? She said, well, do you often climb in dumpsters looking for dead dogs? And I thought, no. And then and there's a drug dealer sitting right in front of me, like with daggers shooting out of his eyes. And she said, do you have dogs, cats, children? And I said, well, hey, why don't you set me up so this guy can come over and kill them all? And so that's a dumpster story. So I have the glaucoma surgery, and the surgeon says, oh, 100% successful. Surgery went well. And I said, oh, yes, it's terribly nice, but why can I still not see? And she said, whoa, hey, not my fault. You better go see your eye doctor. And I thought, well, who the hell are you? And I thought, oh, you're just a surgeon. You did your job, and now you haven't. Okay, so that began. I'm sorry if this is tedious. This is a little tedious. That began what I considered my ocular Twilight Zone odyssey. I have seen 2,000 million eye doctors. Some are nice, some are idiots. Some are helpful, some are not. And I keep getting worse and worse. And dear Isabel, so then I saw this one eye doctor, and he recommended another glaucoma surgeon, because it turned out the glaucoma surgery failed, so I had to have it done again. So he recommended this glaucoma surgeon in a town. Well, you have to be careful how you say it, because it could sound like asshole. Ahole or something like that. Yeah, so we're driving along, and you forget how just embraced we are by the beauty of the Berkshires, the blue hills like on the horizon, like whales breaching, and just meadows strewn with wildflowers like abstract art, and just beauty all around us, and then suddenly you leave, and it's like human habitat, squalor, used car lots and crap. And so, I'm getting tired of all these fucking eye doctors. And so the news is on, and it's about Ukraine and Russia and blah, blah, blah. And I said, in a cranky way, I said, Isabel, dear, can we turn this off and play music? I mean, I can't listen to this bullshit. Do they even know what the fuck they're talking about? And Isabel said, Mom, do you know sometimes you talk like a tough street girl? And I said, oh my God, I know. I'm going to work on that. I know. I do. I'm so sorry. So we get to this surgeon, and meanwhile, we'd asked the original surgeon to forward our records to this new office, which they didn't do. So we're in this little office with this new doctor. Isabel calls this other surgeon, says, hey, we're waiting. Would you fax the records? And you can hear this whole conversation. And one of the technicians says, well, your mother's signature didn't look right on the authorization. And Isabel said, that's the way she writes. Okay, so just release the records. Finally, the glaucoma surgeon I gets on the phone, and she said, listen, we have millions of records. And Isabel said, how very nice for you. I just want my mother. You don't mess with Isabel, man. Well, I'm very busy. Again, I'm pleased to hear it, but I want So this new doctor can hear this whole thing, and he says, girls, why you don't want to drop? Why don't you go back to the other surgeon? And because, girls, the cost of gasoline, this is a long trip for you. Just go back to her. And I'm thinking, does he have a thing with this one? Like, it was so surreal. It went on and on like that. And it got more and more surreal. So we get back in the car, and I knew not to use vulgar language because I'd already been chastised. So I just said, oh, that was not normal. And Isabel said, that was some fucking shit. And I said, who's the tough street girl now? And she said, never mind, Mom, you can curse all you want. That's good. Curse and curse. So is it 7 minutes? Okay, I'm almost, I gotta wrap this up. So we get home, and it's snowing, and the worst thing for glaucoma and this blindness is snow and sun on the snow. Then I'm really blind. And it's snowing, and I let the dogs out, and and one of my Abby came back, my black lab, but my big, white, beautiful German Shepherd, Cassidy, didn't come back. And I thought, and I can't see him out there because he's white. The landscape is white. And Cassidy was really the love of my life. And I forget how I've gotten lots of dogs in different ways I won't tell you about. But we just find each other, let's put it that way. So Cassidy had been an abandoned dog, just chained up and left, and somebody said, you got to go get this dog, this beautiful dog. I said, I already have 4 dogs, thank you. But anyway, I did end up with Cassidy, and I just put him in the house, and I had to go teach a yoga class. And when I came home, the other dogs, their little faces were in the front window with these dazed looks. I thought, oh, I wonder what happened in there. And I walked in, I thought, why is the couch in the middle of the living room? Cassidy dragged it in the middle of the room and disemboweled it, tore out the whole bottom of the couch. And that began, I'd come home every day to mass destruction, books, rugs, pillows. And I would just cry. But he never looked at me. He was like a foster kid. He'd been kicked around too much. And I'd sit on the floor, and one day I was crying. I said, you're ruining my life. And he came up and put his nose next to mine and looked in my eyes with his golden wolf eyes. and that was it. He was like my boyfriend. So he was a wonderful, I mean, he was so beautiful. He'd walk in a room and I'd say, "No, you can't be that beautiful. It's against the law. Get out of here." But so I couldn't find him this day after the surgeon's visit to the crazy surgeon. And I called my wonderful neighbor, John, and he found him. There's a brook along the side of my property. It was frozen. He lost his footing and he fell. On the ice, he couldn't get up and he was shaking. And I thought, oh God, he's 16 years old. I don't want to, 16 is pretty. I've had dogs live into their 20s, but 16 is old for a big dog. And so and then I let him out again the next day, and he got stuck in these bushes. He couldn't get out, and he was disoriented, and I finally got him back in the house, and he went into the corners of the different rooms and put his head in the corner, just as if he was trying to get out of himself, and he let out these unearthly cries. And so I thought, I have to put him down. And I called my friend Belle, and she told me about this veterinarian, Dr. Elizabeth, whose sole practice was euthanasia home visits, which is a wonderful thing to do for people. But as I said, my son always appears when I need him. And he's a nurse in California. And I hadn't told him that I had to put Cassidy down. But he just called. He didn't know that yet. And he called and he said, "Hey, Mom, I'm getting on the red eye. I'll see you in the morning." I thought, well, okay. So Blair arrives as Dr. Elizabeth is there, and Cassidy's lying on the ground, and Blair arrives just in the nick of time to help my friend Gregory dig the hole for Cassidy. And so, life, death, and all I could Cassidy's head wasn't covered yet in the hole, and it could have been the saddest thing, but it kind of wasn't. It felt like God or somebody was there. Do I believe in God? No, but I don't disbelieve. I don't know what I believe. And one time in the woods with all the dogs in Bullard Woods, I was walking and I felt something on my shoulder, and I turned around. There was a face, and I turned away. I was alarmed, and I thought, oh, is that God? Does God even have a face? Like, what? And I turned back, and it was gone, and I thought, I think that might have been God. I know. But when we're all, my daughter Isabel, my son, my Gregory, my friend, we're all around Cassidy as he's being buried. And I thought, in this world of this beautiful world that is equally brutal, all the hideous things that go on, this was about death, and somehow it was beautiful, and somehow its lightness and beauty and its sense of the possibility of God diminished a great deal of darkness. And I couldn't see, but I felt I could see in a different way. And thank you for letting me blab on and on. Oh, okay.